Okay. So welcome to Aryeh, and I see Zahava is watching, and my mother should be back in the States sometime today. Zat Hashem. She has a 29-hour flight back from Japan. Crazy, right? Okay. So Zat Hashem, but sometime soon she'll be landing in Miami. Yeah, she said 13 hours to Doha, or 16 hours to Doha, and then 13 hours to Miami, or the other way around. Zat Hashem, and Yael, and Shana Batsheva, and David, and Avital, Shavre for Ashlema, watches the class. Everybody, Zat Hashem, Chaim. Aaron ben Chana Liba, Zat Hashem, for Ashlema. That's my chavruta. He actually showed up to shul today, which is a miracle, because it's been a week at least since he was in shul. And it was interesting. When he doesn't come, I learn on my own. And when he doesn't come, he learns on his own. And there's nothing like a chavruta. Because there were things that, like we were learning, and he was like, oh, I can't remember. What does that mean? And then he's like, oh yeah, now I remember. And things that I didn't understand on my own, because I learned the same stuff beforehand. And then we learned it again today. That's special to have a chavruta. Bezat Hashem. Okay, so what are we learning in the Likutey Moharan in lesson Hey? Oh, I almost forgot. Next week I'm going to a wedding on Tuesday night. So no class next week. For Nate. Nate, I don't remember his last name. He davens at Mayanot. He's our Shabbos guest. Have you met Nate?
I think so. Is he like an older?
Yeah, he's like, I think 50, 48, 50, something like that. And he's a math professor in the States, and he came over here during Corona, and he liked it so much he wanted to stay, and somehow he's convinced them to teach his classes online, even though he's actually a professor somewhere in New York. And he had some type of brain thing, and he was in the hospital. And when he came out, I said to him, so what's the lesson that you learned by being sick in the hospital? He's like, I'm getting married. And I have this chapter in my first book, I'm Not Ready to Get Married. That's the name of the chapter. And I actually have the chapter saved separately as a PDF. And I send it to single guys that can't decide whether they want to get married. And there are 3 guys, he's one of them, who told me in recently that this is what helped them to get married. That chapter in the book. So I guess it was worth writing the book just for that. Zat Hashem. So next Tuesday night, I think it's the 20-something, but that's the next Tuesday night. If not, if I made a mistake, I'll tell everyone, but I think that's it. Okay. So what do we learn in the Likutey Moharan, part 5, lesson 5? I give an overview every week, but I'll give it again because it's important. We don't always remember. Look at how many lessons we learned. How many of them do you actually remember? So he says, we start off with b'chatzotot v'kol shofar, blowing the shofar, blowing the trumpets, and he says the blowing of the shofar. But then he says you have to remember the whole world was created just for you. It's interesting. I thought this cough was gone. Now it's back. Come to the lessons back. The whole world is created for you. It means that you have a role to play in this world, a special role to play in this world that only you can play, and you have to fill the gap that's missing in the world, and you have to daven for others. And then he spends really the rest of the lesson talking about how do you daven for others. And he says sometimes you can daven straightforward, and you feel a certain joy when you're davening for somebody, but if you don't feel that joy, then you know it's because there was a gzar din in heaven, there was a judgment already in heaven, and so you have to daven for them in a roundabout way, either through a story or in a roundabout way. And then he talks about straightening the crookedness in your heart. And he says that, how do you straighten it? You straighten it with thunder. Just like when there's thunder and lightning, it kind of shocks you. So too, you can, through your own davening, shock yourself, create thunder in your mind, and then that thunder will straighten the crookedness in your heart, which will allow you to do the mitvot with joy, which will allow you to daven with joy, and then you'll be able to daven for somebody else, which is the reason that Hashem created you in the first place. That makes sense, right? That's the progression. Now he spends a lot of time talking about the brain and a person's mind and how to straighten a person's mind. And that's what we've been talking about the last few lessons. So there's we'll just read a little section here in the Kitzur. מאוד מאוד צריכים להיזהר לפנות את המוח מחכמות חיצוניות וממחשבות זרות. A person has to be very careful to turn their thoughts away from external wisdom and from foreign thoughts. Meaning, external wisdom, a person can forget that Hashem is running the world. I would say that's pretty much what he means by external wisdom. Anything that talks about how to deal with your problems on a spiritual level without including Hashem. And machshavot zarot is the Yetzer Hara coming to mix you up, confuse you, and stress you out, which anybody who's not a tzaddik gamor has to deal with that, myself included. Mechamet shelo yachmitz et chokhmato b'chokhmot chitzoniyot v'ta'avot. You have to be very careful from chametz, and then he spends a long time talking about chametz and matzah, and how they're the same letters except one has a chet and one has a hey. And he talks about making an opening in the chet, it turns it into a hey, and it goes from chametz, which is forbidden, which is leavened, which is sour, to matzah, which is kosher and permitted. And matzah is also the lechem, what is it called? Lachma hemnuta, is that how you say it? How do you say it?
Nama demei hamuta.
Nama demei demuta. That's how you say it?
Demei hamuta, yeah.
Demei hemuta. Okay, so the bread of faith. And so we go from being sour and bitter to having a level of faith. And he says, basically what he's saying is you have to work on this all the time. It's not going to happen on its own. And the natural result, the natural default is to be depressed. It is easy to be sad and depressed. It's hard to be happy. It's hard to be joyous. We've talked about this many times. And it takes work in order to get there. Ki hey matamtamim umetam'in mocho ve'efshar lo lechaven betfilato ve'efshar lo lismoach. And so these thoughts are going to come, and they're going to block a person's thoughts, and they're not going to allow a person to daven with the proper intention, and then they won't be able to be joyous. וגם צריך לשמור עצמו מאוד שלא יהיה לו יראה חיצונית, and a person also has to be very careful not to have external fears, meaning yira nefula, a fallen fear, meaning that you're scared of things, like you have, for example, a job, and you're worried that the job is going to end and you're going to lose your parnasa. So that's a fallen fear. Even though it's a natural fear, I have the same fear, everyone has the same fears, but then you have to strengthen yourself in that fear and remember that Hashem is running the world. And just like I had a job 20 years ago, and I don't have that job anymore, in the last 20 years I've been able to get by through other businesses and other jobs, and Hashem provided those for me, so too Hashem will provide for me in the future. That's a fallen fear that's uplifted. That's how you do it. That's the thought process that goes through your brain. You have to say these things to yourself. Remind yourself, just like Hashem carried me through the last 20 years, Hashem will carry me through my whole life, and I don't have to be scared of losing my job, God forbid, or something else. שלא יראה משום דבר, רק מהשם יתברך, לבד. Don't be scared of anything, only from Hashem. Only from Hashem. כי על ידי יראות חיצוניות אי אפשר לכוון בתפילתו, ומונע השמחה. And through these external fears, it's impossible for a person to daven with the proper intention, and it prevents a person from being joyous. And you know, the Baal Shem Tov, he was an orphan at a very young age. I think it was 4 or 5, something really crazy like that. Both of his parents died. And before his father died, he called the Baal Shem Tov over, he called Yisrael over, and he said to him, don't be scared of anything except for Hashem. Those were his final words to his son. And I don't believe he had any siblings, the Baal Shem Tov. I'm not sure. And those were the words that he lived with. And that's how he became such a great tzaddik, because he was able to actually live with that and not be scared of anything. והעיקר לשמור מוחו שלא יחמיץ ולא יהרהר בהרהורים רעים בתאוות שהם כמעט חמץ שהם סתרא דמותא. The person has to guard their thoughts so that they don't become soured, and to have these bad thoughts and desires that they're connected to the chametz, which is from the side of death. וצריך לגאור באלו המחשבות שהם סתרת המותא, סתרה אחרין, ולגרשם מדעתו ומחשבתו. And a person has to drive out these thoughts that come from the evil side, from the negative side, and to push them out. This is the work that you have to do, that we all have to do, myself included, to push these thoughts aside. שלא יתקרבו אליו. Don't even come close to these thoughts. ולשמור עצמו מאוד שלא ייכנסו במוחו אלו המחשבות חס ושלום. And to guard yourself so that these thoughts will not enter into your mind, God forbid. וגם צריך לשתף האהבה עם היראה. So this is where we're going. You also have to bring together love and fear, or awe. ואז דייקה יוכל לזכך מוחו. And then specifically a person can purify their mind. שיתפלל בכוונה גדולה, to daven with the proper intention, great intention, בכל הכוחות, with all of a person's energies, עד שיהיה תפילתו, בבחינת רעמים, until the person's davening becomes like thunder, שעל ידי זה זוכה לשמחה, וכולי כנ"ל, and through this a person will merit joy as mentioned above. And we want to tie it back, because you have to reach this level of being able to daven with joy and do the mitzvot with joy, so that your davening will reach the places up in heaven and be accepted, so that you will fulfill the purpose of your creation, because the whole world was created just for you. So that's what we're going to read now, just a little bit in depth. מכיוון שהכוח ללחם עם מחשבות זרות והרהורי התאוות, because the power to fight with the foreign thoughts and the thinking and desires, hu kshe'amoach naki. This is when, how can you fight these thoughts? It's only when your mind is clean. Umi shekvar pagam, and somebody who already has damage in their mind, kashe alav hadavar ma'od. This is going to be a very difficult thing for that person. V'lachen hatzadikim oskim b'minchama zo b'shvilo. And so the tzadikim are fighting this battle for us. V'zoi b'chinat ha'machloket sheben hatzadikim hashlemim. And this is the idea of the fights between true tzadikim. U'ma shemutal aleinu, and what's our obligation, hu la'amin shezeu kol inyan machlotam, is to believe that this whole thing of the tzadikim arguing with one another, rak kedei legaresh et sitra chra, it's only to push out the negative energy, the yetzer hara, velo al davar acher chas v'shalom, and not for something else, God forbid. Not to think that when tzaddikim are arguing with one another, it's really an argument between tzaddikim, like two people that don't get along with one another. God forbid. The arguments among tzaddikim, and I'm trying to think, I'm guessing Chabad and Satmar, and I don't really know. Maybe you know arguments of tzaddikim. But there are arguments of tzaddikim. I'm sure there still are today. I know there's definitely arguments of Hasidim, and that's kind of stupid. I know between Chabad and Breslov there's a lot of friction. It doesn't make any sense to me, honestly. It's just like people choosing teams. But if there were really some type of disagreement between this tzaddik and that tzaddik, the whole purpose of it is to kind of create a fog to not allow the negative energy to come in. And if you were to hear the argument of the tzaddikim, you could use that as a form of tochacha, of rebuke, to straighten your own heart. That's what he's trying to say here. We also had a lesson a while back that said, which is something we say in the davening every day from Tehillim, that Hashem prepares the clouds in order to bring the rain down. And the arguments between tzaddikim is like the clouds, in order so that the rain, the shefa, can come down. There's arguments between tzaddikim in order to create distraction, deception, so that the negative energy in the world doesn't block the abundance that they can bring down. And if you think about it today, we have a war going on, even though sitting here in Jerusalem, you wouldn't even know it. And Bezrat Hashem, our soldiers should be successful, and everyone should have a fuah shlema, and the returning of the captives, and all of those things. And so we have weapons, and then anti-weapons, and then anti-anti-weapons, and then anti-anti-anti-weapons. And that's how these things work. There's the RPG, and then the tank has the trophy system, which is an anti-RPG, and probably saved who knows how many hundreds or thousands of soldiers' lives. And so that's basically the arguments between tzaddikim, is like the anti-missile. And don't think that it's really, like if you see a missile coming from a tank to hit the missile that's coming to hit the tank, don't think that it's two missiles that are arguing with one another. That's basically what he's saying. He's saying this is the bad missile and this is the good missile. And when you see the two of them explode, you understand that one is coming to save a person from the harm that the other one is doing. And when tzaddikim are arguing with one another, it's in order to create something that is going to help us. And if we know that, and we don't, and that's what he says here, mutal aleinu la'amin shezeu kol inyan machlotam rak kedei legeresh et sitra chra velo al davar acher chas v'shalom. We are obligated to believe that the arguments between tzaddikim are not actually arguments, God forbid, but to push away the negative energy in the world. V'ta'amin כי כל מצותה ומריבה שיש בין צדיקים שלמים, and you should believe that all of the strife and arguments that there's between true tzaddikim, אין זה אלא כדי שיגרשו סיטרין אחרין. It's only to push away the negative energy. את הסיטרחה, כמובן לעיל, as is mentioned above. שהם שוברים את קנה האות ה' שהוא חמץ, they break the line in the letter chet in order to create a hay from the chet, ועושים ממנו מצה, so we go from chametz to matzah, al yedei matzah umeriva, and this is connected to matzah umeriva, meaning the strife and the arguments between tzaddikim. This is how Rabbi Nachman likes to build his lessons. V'zeu perush pasuk, and this is the meaning of the verse, ozen shomat tochachat chayim bekerev chachamim talin. The ear that can hear rebuke, the rebuke of life, that person will dwell close to the chachamim, to the tzaddikim. Meaning that if you hear an argument between tzaddikim, you look at that and you try to find something in order to rebuke yourself. Not to believe in the argument itself, but to find some way of kind of, in a sense, criticizing yourself in you're doing the mitvot and you're davening, but not to, God forbid, get to the point where you get stuck there. It's in order to kind of like give yourself a little punch to move yourself forward. My wife comes to the Tanya class here every morning, and she was telling me that that's what they were learning in the Tanya this morning, that the Alter Rebbe says that a person has to bring themselves to a place of bitterness over their situation, but not, God forbid, to get stuck there. Meaning, I could daven better. I could say the words with more intention. When I'm doing a mitzvah, I can do it with more joy. When I give tzedakah, I can be happy and not bitter over giving the tzedakah. You know, I need the shekel. You don't really need the shekel. You can give the shekel. Maybe sometimes you do need the shekel, but even then you can give the shekel. That type of work. So he says, Ozen Shomat, if you're able to hear the argument of tzaddikim, you'll end up being elevated by it. Talin ulashon tnuna umiriva, and he says also the word talin, which means to dwell or to spend the night, is also from the word tnuna, complain, and miriva, an argument. Bekev chachamim talim umiriva sheben tzaddikim. This is the argument between the tzaddikim. V'lachen kshe'ata shomea merivot sheben tzaddikim teda. And so when you hear arguments between tzaddikim, you should know Shezeh mashmi'in otcha tochacha. They're basically broadcasting out to you a type of rebuke. V'zeu osun shoma tochachat. This is the ear that hears the rebuke. Ve'al shepagamta be'tipei mochacha. And since you damaged the drops that come into your mind, ועל זה נאמר פסוק כל באר לא ישובון ולא ישיגו אורחות חיים. And meaning that if a person allows themselves to get deeper and deeper and deeper into sadness and depression and forget to rely upon Hashem, you could reach a place where you don't return, and these are people that don't have a long life. The Gemara and our sages of blessed memory said in the Gemara, in Avodah Zarah Yud Zayin, ve'akavana hi al minot, and the intention is, I'm not sure what that is, minot. And here he's saying it, shehi chochmot chitzoniot, that this is the shel kfira. Whatever the word minot is, maybe I'm just not remembering what the word means. It means external wisdom of kfira, of heresy, God forbid. Shehem pogot et hamoach, which causes damage to the person's mind. וכך גם הרהורי התאוות, and also thoughts of unholy desires. שגם מהם קשה מאוד לצאת. It's also difficult to break out of that. I mentioned probably last week that somebody's buying me lottery tickets as supporting the Hasidic Story podcast. He came to shul yesterday looking for me with a lottery ticket. And he said, I'm just really addicted to these tickets. I can't stop buying them, but I promised my wife I wouldn't buy them. And if I'm buying them for you, I'm not buying it for me. And I said to him, maybe you can stop buying them altogether. And he's like, no, I can't. But at least I'm using it for something good. It really breaks my heart every time that I don't win anything, or I win like 1 shekel or 10 shekels. It was 50 shekels for this stupid card. And we didn't win anything. I told him I'll split anything 50-50 with him. Anything above the actual number, which hasn't happened yet. So he's saying, you get stuck in these hirhurei hata'avot. It's also difficult to break out of them. שמחימת זה אתה דבוק בסתרה דמותה מצד המוות. And as a result, you get stuck in this place of being connected to the side of death, which is the opposite of life. בבחינת chametz, which is connected to chametz, sourness or levenness. שבא מבחינת ירד גבריאל וכולי, that comes from the angel Gabriel. This was a quote that we had before, that comes and puts down a staff. This putting down the staff is the hey and the chet, when we're talking about the word matzah and chametz. And the angel Gabriel comes and turns the matzah into chametz. Shalom Aleichem. What's your name? Again? Avram Chaim. You've been here before. Online. Okay, so welcome. This is Aryeh, and I'm Barak. Welcome. Okay, good. Yeah, I'll never heard the word minot either, so I'm safe. Okay, you've been following the lessons. You know what we're talking about. Okay. So he says the angel Gabriel comes. So what he's saying is when you get attached to these foreign thoughts, when you're not guarding your thinking, then the matzah can turn into chametz, meaning that what was kosher can turn into something that is sour. Hainu chokhmot chitzoniot, that is external wisdom, which I think that a good definition is any type of wisdom that doesn't include Hashem. Shem b'chinat kaneh desitra achra na'utzim biyad chokhmatcha, which is the idea of this kaneh, which is a reed from the negative side that's stuck in the sea of your wisdom. So this is like very poetic, Rabbi Nachman speaking here. What it means is that you can allow something to come and block your ability to see Hashem in your life by not continually guarding your thoughts and allowing other thoughts to come in. V'zo hasiba, and this is the reason, she'ata shomea me'tzluna u'meriva shel tzadikim ze im ze, when you hear complaints or an argument between tzadikim, ki'ilu he meriva gemora, it's as if it's a real argument. Ubevadai im lo haya nifka muchacha, and for sure, if your mind wasn't damaged, lo haya nishma lecha merivot sheben hatzadikim, you wouldn't even hear the arguments between the tzadikim. Sha'ayta lecha da'at la'avin, you wouldn't even have the ability to understand. Va'ayta lecha da'at la'avin, and you would understand that this wasn't truly shebe'emet einam chonkim ze im ze, they're not actually arguing with one another, ela shemalbishim et sitra achra be'demut adam, but rather they're enclothing the negative energy in the form of a person, kedei lachlok aleha, in order to argue about it, ve'ein meriva ela bishvilcha. This strife between the tzaddikim is actually only for you, kedei shetashuv mimavet lechaim, so that you return from death to life, mechametz lematzah, from leavened to matzah, mechet lehei, from the letter chet to the letter hey, shetashuv meyir'a ra'ah, mekol pagum, that you'll return from bad fear and from a damaged voice, me chokhmah peguma, from a damaged way of thinking, leyira tova, to proper fear, lekol tov, to a good voice, velechokhmah tova, and to proper wisdom. Meaning that you'll be able to daven in a proper way. You'll be able to daven for others, and you'll be able to daven with joy, which is the whole purpose that you were created, because the whole world is created just for you. And if the whole world was created for you, then you have a role to play, and part of that role is to daven for others. And if you will guard your thoughts, your mind, from this point on, from chametz, because after you heard the argument between the tzaddikim, and you understood that any argument between the tzaddikim was only for you, for your benefit, to take out the negative energy from within you, shavta me mavet lechaim, and you returned from death to life, mechametz lematzah, from leavened to matzah, v'zachita shelo yeh mochacha atum, and you merited that your mind won't be blocked. Azai shemitpalel bekol ubekoach, then when you daven with your voice and with the energy, yifka koncha begangalatcha, your voice will penetrate your mind, v'yit aved v'yaseh sham ram, and it will create a thunder in your mind. V'aram yorer alev, and this thunder will arouse the heart. V'yitpashet akmumiyot shebelibcha, and it will straighten out the crookedness in your heart. V'az tizke lesimcha, and then you will merit to be joyous. Kamo shekatuv, as it's written in Tehillim, lishrei lev simcha, to those that have a straight heart, they have joy. We're just going to read one more little section here. V'zeh perush hakatuv, and this is the meaning of what's written in Tehillim. Aancha b'seter ram, avchancha al mei meriva sela. So he's bringing a quote that says, I answered you in a hidden way with this thunder, and you were able to distinguish between the waters of strife, Sela. Mei meriva, the waters of strife, v'bchinat matzah. This is connected to matzah. As was mentioned above, shematzah hi lashon meriva. Matzah is connected to the argument of tzaddikim. V'al yedei she'oseh milchama im hayihurim hara'im, and when a person battles with the negative thoughts that they have, umegaresh otam me lachmitz et mocho, and you force them out from souring your thoughts in your mind, zoche shemocho yeh kadosh b'kedushat matzah. A person merits that their mind will be holy with the holiness of matzah, ki matzah ibchinat mochin, because matzah is connected to the mind, she'al yedei zeh naaseh hakol, that through that the voice is created, shehu pogea b'moach ra'amim, which penetrates a person's mind with the thunder, v'yodim nozlim memocho leyasher et akmumiyut libo, and there's some type of liquid that comes down from your brain, and it straightens out the crookedness in a person's heart. Ve'yuchal levo lesimcha gedola ba'asiyat mitzvot, and then a person can reach a place of true joy in doing the mitzvot. Ad she'im ro'eh she'eino sameach kol kach, to the point that a person is able to see that if they're not really happy, Umevin mitoch kach, the person understands from this, שבוודאי ישנה איזה גזירה בעולם שנה ונפש, a person understands that of course there is a judgment in heaven against the world, against time or an individual, ויודע להלביש תפילתו בסיפור ומאמר. And a person knows to enclose their davening either in a story or a roundabout way of saying what they want to say. Okay, that's where we're stopping for today. You have any questions? No questions. Okay, so we'll just read the next little section here, where we're going to continue next week. לאחר שביאר כמה בחינות במידת הגבורה, after he explained several aspects related to גבורה, stringency, כי הקול שמוציא המתפלל בכוח פוגע במוח ונעשה רעמים, the sound that comes out of your voice penetrates your mind and creates a thunder, שהם מיישרים את הלב, which straightens out a person's heart, שיוכל לכוון בתפילה, that a person can daven with the proper intention, ונפשט הקמומיות, and it straightens out the crookedness in a person's heart, שכל זה הוא בחינת גבורות, that all of this is related to gvura, meaning stringency, strictness, toughness. וכן נתפאר, and so he's going to explain, שכדי שיזכה לקול הזה, in order to merit to have this voice, צריך שתהיה לו יראת שמיים. A person has to have a fear of heaven. שהיא בחינת גבורה, which is connected to gvura. So what does it mean to have a fear of heaven? It means that when Hashem says keep kosher, it means that you don't eat treif, even if it smells really good. And where does that come from? It comes from gevura, because you tell yourself, I know that as a Jew that follows Torah and mitvot, I'm not allowed to eat bacon, even though it smells good. Okay, you can have kosher bacon here, but the non-kosher bacon, there's restaurants that have kosher bacon here in Jerusalem. Crave and Mojo's. Those are two at least that I know about. But you see like non-kosher food, and you say, why am I not going to eat it? I'm not going to allow myself to eat it. That's gvura. So he says, all of this that we reached at this point is from gvura. Now he's going to explain, שעדיין אין גבורות אלא פועלות לפתיחת המוח. What are these gvurot, what are these stringencies doing? They're only going to open up your mind עד שיכלול אותם בחסדים בבחינת אהבת השם. In order to include within them chesed, kindness, love, to reach a love of Hashem. So basically, in order to reach the place where you truly have love of Hashem, you have to have a certain strictness with yourself. In order to create, you're basically creating within yourself a world of Torah and mitzvot. Unless you're growing up in a home where people are hitting you if you're not keeping mitzvot, then you're basically doing it on your own. And even then, at a certain point, you're going to grow up and you're going to do it on your own. And you're taking the mitzvot seriously, it comes from a place of gevura, but that gevura can't have a loving relationship with Hashem. If it's all gevura, there's no place for love. But if there's only love, you can't have a relationship with Hashem either. So he says, first you have to have the gevura, and then you have to bring in the love, and then you have to synthesize the two, and that's how you have the relationship with Hashem. And that's what we're heading towards next week. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a short story about the chassid of the Rebbe Maharash, Rabbi Shmuel of Lubavitch, who passed away in 1882. And there was a draft in Russia in those days, and the Jews were specifically targeted, and they were drafted usually at a young age, and they were drafted for 25 or 30 years, and that meant that when they left, they were either completely screwed up or they didn't want to be Jewish anymore. There were some people that remained committed to lives of Torah and mitzvot. They were called the kantonistim. I'm not sure what they're called in Russian. And they actually made separate communities for themselves. They made separate shuls for themselves because they were a little crazy and they weren't able to integrate. But there was this guy, Chaim Ber is his name, And he got a draft notice to be drafted into the Tsar's army back in 1882, and he doesn't know what to do. He goes to the Rebbe Maharash, the Rebbe Maharash in Lubavitch in Russia. And there's a huge line. People are waiting for weeks to see the Rebbe. And he tells the Gabbai, listen, it's an emergency. I got a draft notice. Then the Gabbai says, well, the Rebbe actually gave a special instruction. Any soldiers are brought straight to the front. So within a few minutes, he's standing there in front of the Rebbe Maharash. He shows him the draft notice, and the Rebbe says, I promise you won't be drafted. So he says, great. He leaves, he goes back home, and he's sitting and learning, and he's not thinking about it at all. And things are going really great, nobody's bothering him, but the draft date is coming up. And then on the 13th of Tishrei, 1882, the Rebbe Maharash passes away. And he doesn't know what to do. He got a bracha from the Rebbe, but he hasn't been drafted yet. And in a few days, the draft is coming up. And so he doesn't have a choice. He goes to the recruiting center, whatever it was called, and he sees there's a huge line and lots of people, and he's saying Tehillim all the time, and he's being moved from room to room, and they're checking him, and he's going up the stairs, and he feels somebody like standing on his feet behind him. And he goes up another step, and this guy is like really bothering him, so he turns around. He says, hey, watch it. And who does he see right behind him? The Rebbe Maharash. Now, the Rebbe Maharash had passed away. He turns white. His heart is beating like crazy. He starts sweating cold sweat. He says, it must be my imagination. He goes up a few more steps. He turns around again, and he sees the Rebbe staring straight in his eyes. He starts freaking out. He goes into the next room. That was the room where the doctor was checking his heart. The doctor puts the stethoscope on his heart. His heart's going all over the place. He's white. He's got this cold sweat. The doctor says, get out of here. You're not fit for military service. And that was it. That was how the Rebbe Maharash kept his promise that he wouldn't be drafted even after he left this world. So, what do we know? The power of tzaddikim. By the way, there are many stories of at least the Lubavitch Rebbe's appearing after they left this world, while they were in this world and other places, and apparently there's some way of doing that, and they knew how to do it. Okay. Everyone.